let's get into the meat and potatoes here. Jim Harbaugh is currently the head coach at the University of Michigan, your favorite team.
Yes,
But
sir.
right now, he is in talks with the Minnesota Vikings. Adrian, fill me in, catch me up, catch the world up to what is going on and how this may not be all what it actually seems.
So I I don't want anybody to I it's 50-50, right? I don't want anybody to think that this isn't a legitimate offer and that this isn't something that Harbaugh is legitimately considering, right? Like he has been adamant about wanting to return to the NFL. I think the last few years at Michigan, he wasn't really entertaining it because he was just happy to be back at his alma mater. He had a certain level of success. Um, but I think what happened really, right, there's two factors at play. At the beginning of the 2021 NCAA college season, right, Harbaugh was kind of on the wrong end of the ire of the boosters with Michigan football, right? Because despite having winning records, right, and I would argue fielding some pretty good teams, we've had a couple of NFL draft prospects. If you're a Michigan fan, there's one team that you know every year on your schedule that you absolutely have to beat. If you do not beat this team, the season is considered a failure, and that's Ohio State. And in his entire tenure to this point, he had not beaten Ohio State. We got close, I think, one year, but the other years it was very clear the difference in the level of competition. And these were good Michigan teams, right?
Yeah.
So that's one element. Because of that failure, being able to get over that hump of toppling the Ohio State Buckeyes, they docked his salary and basically said, hey, we don't want to get rid of you, but we might have to get rid of you. And he basically came back and said, well, how about this? How about we renegotiate my salary? I'll take significantly less money. And we'll put a bunch of incentives in there for me. If we end up winning the Big Ten, if we, go on, win a bowl game, stuff like that. Right. Well, there'll be a bunch of incentives back later. And he said, all those incentives, if I get them, I'll donate them back to the university, right? So he ended up hitting those incentives. We ended up beating Ohio State this year, thank God. And then he ended up, winning the Big Ten outright. And then, went to the bowl game, got slaughtered.
Yeah, that was a rough one, man.
Got slaughtered, right? It's not what we wanted, but I think it's kind of what everybody expected to happen. But it was an unprecedented amount of success. And the goal was just beat Ohio State. We cannot live with the embarrassment of, losing to Ohio State. And if you look all this season, right, they had it posted all in the locker rooms at Michigan. What are you doing that's going to help beat Ohio State? Like they're big posters coming up talking about that, right? This has been the theme of the whole season. So you finally get that out the way, right? Jim Harbaugh has arguably his best season with the Michigan Wolverines. I think it really catapulted the program into the spotlight nationally. It's a lot of recruits, right, that are now, we couldn't get over that Ohio State hump, but now that we did, right, there's a lot more recruits that maybe would have leaned to a whole nother school or would have been leaning towards Ohio State that we're now getting over into Michigan, right? I think that this recruiting class for Michigan is probably one of the strongest that I've seen in a long time, definitely the strongest at several positions since Harbaugh's been there.
Yeah.
So that's one element to this whole equation behind him going to the NFL, right? It's a domino effect because they asked him to take more money or they did that whole negotiated situation, right? It's kind of embarrassing as a coach. And if you know anything about Harbaugh, like he has a fiery temper and he has a little petty streak to him.
Yeah.
So second part of that, we'll come back to that. Second part of this, right? The newly minted GM of the Minnesota Vikings is I'm probably going to butcher his name, but it's Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, right?
Yes.
And this is where it kind of gets a little interesting. He's kind of had an unconventional route to get into the NFL, right? He's an ex-Wall Street guy, but he gets introduced to Jim Harbaugh, and I think they have about 2 years overlapping during his tenure as a head coach of the San Francisco 49ers. He was one of their senior research people in their research department, and as a matter of fact, he was actually so good on that research team that he was invited to be in the rooms with a lot of executives and presidents of the 49ers organization. He was actually a large driving force behind the hire of Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch as their, current coach and GM situation, right? He didn't spearhead it, but he was a lot of the behind the scenes guy, making sure that process went smooth, making sure that they did their homework on, both candidates and they got the right guys. And I think you can argue with the success of the 49ers, even though I hate them, I think you can argue that they have the right people in place that are running that organization currently, right?
Yeah.
So now he gets his shot over with the Minnesota Vikings. But apparently him and Harbaugh had a very, good relationship during his tenure there. They both respected each other. And Kwesi Adolfo has really always loved kind of Harbaugh's, tough-nosed approach and the who's got it better than us mentality, right? And I think that's something that, the Vikings are missing, and something that he's itching to bring in, like a candidate that embodies all of those morals, those values, right? That comes from a winning pedigree, regardless of whether you like Jim Harbaugh or not. You can't argue that he's not a winner. He's a winner. He was a winner at Stafford. Not Stafford. He was a winner at Stanford. He was a winner at Michigan. And he was a winner when he was with the 49ers, right? Up until they kind of pulled the rug out from under him and tried to make him run that funky ass offense that ultimately led to the whole Colin Kaepernick debacle, him getting fired and all that fun stuff that happened, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I do think there is mutual interest, right? I think they legitimately want him to be the head coach of the Vikings. And I think there's a part of him that's like, hey, I would love to come take another crack at this NFL gig, especially with a GM that I already know, I have an established relationship with, and we have a lot of respect. We could build something special, right? And this is a guy that has some kind of success, right? Big analytics background, Wall Street background, building a successful organization. He's done it over there with the 49ers. He's a big contributing factor to that. So it's kind of exciting to be on the ground floor of that. So I do think that this is a real offer. Otherwise, they wouldn't have called him back for a second interview. But the way that I also see this is, I don't know if Harbaugh would leave in such a fuss, right, in such a frenzy, regardless of how he might have felt slighted by, Michigan coming to him and saying, hey, you got to take a pay cut or we got to get rid of you and stuff like that. I know that kind of sticks in his craw, but I don't think he's willing to leave his alma mater in tatters, which is what this move would actually do. If he ends up taking this position with the Minnesota Vikings, it is going to set the Michigan Wolverine program back, I would say, probably a good 3 to 5 years. And
there's a recruiting class coming in.
And their recruiting class would be set back even further, right? Because I would say that the recruiting class has really started hitting just this past season and this season upcoming, right? These are the two strongest recruiting classes since he's been there, right? Because he kind of had to rebuild the reputation of Michigan and get kids to even want to come and commit there, right?
Yeah,
because we're now coming up with, this is a generation of kids that don't understand the history and the pageantry of the University of Michigan, right? And what they used to mean in the NCAA before we had the current playoff format. We had the BCS championship. They don't understand how dominant a football power, right? Most people coming up now, all we know is SEC and Alabama. You know what I mean? Like that's for this generation, that's who the most dominant power has been. So it would absolutely implode, explode the recruiting for them, and just with the way the current transfer portal rules are set up, I could see probably at least 60% of the commits decommitting and going elsewhere, and maybe not initially, right? But with news of his departure, you got to believe that these other recruiting arms of all these other universities are just waiting to poach these kids from Michigan, right? And there's some established talent that's already on this roster that's maybe like, man, I don't know if I want to go to another regime. I was kind of looking forward to coming back for Harbaugh Part 2. You know what I mean? So some of the existing roster could be leaving. But here's my take on it, right? I don't think, as much as I think he loves the idea of being an NFL head coach and competing at that level again, and I do think there will be a day where he is back in the NFL. I just don't think it's this year, right?
Yeah.
My take is that he's really going to entertain this second interview. He's going to look to get that tentative offer from, the Minnesota Vikings, and he's going to go back to the University of Michigan, and he's going to say, now you have to play ball on my terms.
Yeah.
If I'm going to say no to this job, one, I'm going to need my old rate of pay and then some. We're going to negotiate a new rate of pay, right? I think he's going to negotiate some more incentives in there in his contract. I think he's going to negotiate a fixed term for him where he's going to say, hey, regardless of what I do with this record, you guys are going to give me X amount of time and I'm not going to hear your mouth about it. And there will be no docking of pay or any of that other stuff, right? Like we're going to get all of that language written in my contract, because you do understand that this generation is not necessarily coming to play for the brand. They're coming to play for the name. They're coming to play for Harbaugh. So, and especially based on the success that we had. So if you want to continue to build off of what we started last year, you're going to have to come back to the table. You're going to have to give me a little bit more control. You're going to have to give me a little bit more of the things that I'm asking for. And you're definitely going to have to give me a lot more money. You're definitely going to have to give me a lot more money. And I think it is a solid bargaining chip, right? Because he's leaving Michigan in such a bad position if he walks away. Yeah. Who is the heir apparent over there, right? You know, their defensive coordinator, and his name is escaping me, but he just left to go be the defensive coordinator for the Ravens, right? And he was,
I heard about that.
A lot of people said that he was like the whiz kid. He was like some kind of wonder kind, right? Yeah. And that would have been the heir apparent for it. And then we're so late in the cycle for college football in terms of hiring and you know, stuff like that. We're already like really in the
Michigan's
final
side, man, that they got to resign this.
That's guy. What I'm saying. We're in the final stretch of the recruiting phase. You can't just bring in anybody right now. And there's not a lot of candidates out there that are attractive.
And Adrian, another point, man, is you look what happened with Oklahoma Sooners, right? Their coach, when he's going to USC, look how many folks are transferring to USC because they want to be with that coach. Or
let's talk about it. Let's talk about it like just briefly, right? I know we came on here to talk about Michigan, but Lincoln Riley to USC, what is that going to end up doing to the Oklahoma program, and how far is it going to set that program back? And I can tell you this, they got the most significant transfer in the transfer portal today. Caleb Wilson is officially part of the USC Trojans, right? He was going to be the quarterback of the future over there with the Sooners, but he left Oklahoma to follow his coach over to USC. And I think that gives Lincoln Riley a head start with this new regime. I'm not saying that they're going to go win, you know, playoffs and championships right now, but I mean, they are going to be competitive because guess what? He has a quarterback who knows his system, who is also going to help implement his structure and his style to this university, right? Like that's a big, big thing. And I was like, just look at Oklahoma. I think you hit it right on the head, right? Oklahoma is going to be the case study for what happens when a big name coach walks away from an established program and goes to an even more prominent program, right? Yeah. And I think there's that vacuum that we see. How many kids canceled their commitments to Oklahoma this year? How many people from that roster are now over at USC, including, you know, the future at quarterback over there is going over to USC? Yeah. I mean, it is insane. And I think the transfer portal window, I think today was the last day because they stopped signing up for classes. So like I said, if Harbaugh walks away right now, they're kind of stuck. They're kind of stuck. And I mean, I would be lying to you if I said I knew all the rules around the transfer portal and stuff like that because they've changed so much stuff. But I do think that there's still an opportunity for some of these kids to move. Yeah. They just may lose some eligibility for the season in terms of being able to play, but they won't be at Michigan, right? So that's what I'm saying. It's going to create a vacuum of power suck. There's going to be an infinite exodus of talent if Harbaugh leaves. And I know that there's a camp, you know, for the Michigan Wolverine fan base that wants Harbaugh gone. You know, that doesn't think that he's that good of a coach. And to them, I would say this. Even if he's not your favorite person, even if you don't like his personality, even if you think that he has certain deficiencies, I know for me personally, I think his inability to recruit a solid quarterback has really kind of slowed down the growth and development of this program. Yeah. But every time I think I want him gone, I think back to the Brady Hoke years. I think back to the, God forbid, the Rich Rodriguez years, right? Where he came in, this is an outsider, not an alumni, coming back from West Virginia to come and coach this team, and he completely dismantled us. Like, for all the criticisms that Harbaugh gets, he really helped restore a lot of pride and prestige to the University of Michigan football program. And we owe him a lot for that. And like I said, I do think it's going to be a dark day if he chooses to leave this job for the Minnesota Vikings job. as a fan of the Wolverines, I'll hate it. My dad will hate it too, but my dad will also love it because my dad is a Minnesota Vikings fan. And I think you got to be excited about that if you're a Vikings fan, because, you know, it's just, there's no good way for this to play out if he leaves. That's my thing. Strictly from a college perspective, I hate it. Ohio State would love it because they go right back to being the top dog in the Big Ten. But man, what a dark day. It's confusing times, and I think we'll know relatively quickly what that decision is going to be, right? Because we're starting to see these NFL teams make their final decisions on a lot of these head coaches. So they don't really have a lot of time to be waiting around like, hey, what are you going to do? There's not going to be a lot of negotiating. And I think also, right, that plays back into Harbaugh's favor because he can go back to Michigan and be like, hey, you don't have time to think about this. I need an answer now. Because if you don't tell me, and then I'm just going to tell Minnesota I'm coming.
And I'll go. I'll cap this off too. Is that, you know, Jim Harbaugh's eye for talent totally benefits Michigan,
minus the quarterback position.
No, I agree. Yeah, no, you're right. Minus the quarterback position,
which is ironic considering he played the position.
Exactly. You would think like, hey, he would have some type of IQ.
But we have another example of that in the NFL, right? Like John Elway and quarterback situation in Denver. Heck of a salesman. Can't draft a quarterback over there to save his life.
He was on a blood bench to get the quarterback by any means necessary, man. But no, I'll say as Jim Harbaugh is a wonderful genius when it comes to business. It pisses you off if you're a Michigan fan because you don't want him to leave. But if you're a Vikings fan, it's like, hey. And then for him, it's like he has this relationship with the new GM for the Minnesota Vikings. But then also as well, he's going to get the bag either way because now it becomes, who's going to take and pay him more.
Well, I tell you what.
Take notes, folks. Take notes.
Now another sports center. It's a movement.